is in session. Today, the Chamber continues to hear testimony of civil party Su TV, and after it concludes, it begins to hear testimony of another civil party, that is to TCCP 264. Mr. Hoi, please report the attendance of the parties and other individuals to today's proceedings. Thank you, Mr. President. For today's proceedings, all parties to discuss are present. Mr. Nguyen Chi is present in the holding cell downstairs. He has waived his right to be present in the courtroom. The waiver has been delivered to the greffier. Civil party who is to conclude his testimony today, that is Su TV, is present in the courtroom. Today we also have a reserved civil party through TCCP 264. Thank you. President, thank you, Mr. Hoi. The Chamber now decides on the request by Nguyen Chi. The Chamber has received a waiver from Nguyen Chi dated 24 August 2016, which states that due to his health, that is headache, back pain, he cannot sit or concentrate for long, and in order to effectively participate in future hearings, he requests to waive his right to be present at the 24 August 2016 hearing. He advises that his counsel advised him about the consequence of this waiver, that in no way it can be construed as a waiver of his rights to be tried fairly or to challenge the evidence presented to or admitted by this court at any time during this trial. Having seen the medical report of Nguyen Chi by the duty doctor for the accused at the ECCC, dated 24 August 2016, which notes that Nguyen Chi has back pain and feels dizzy, and recommends that the Chamber shall grant him his request so that he can follow the proceedings remotely from the holding cell downstairs. Based on the above information, and pursuant to Rule 81.5 of the ECCC internal rules, the Chamber grants Nguyen Chi his request to follow today's proceedings remotely from the holding cell downstairs via an audio-visual means. The Chamber instructs the AV unit personnel to link the proceedings to the room downstairs so that Nguyen Chi can follow. That applies for the whole day. And the Chamber would like now to hand the floor to the co-prosecutor to put question to the civil party.
Good morning, Your Honors, Counsel, and Madam Witness. I'd like to switch topics a bit today and ask you some questions about your detention at various facilities that you talked about in prior statements. You mentioned a place where you were detained at Krang Che, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Can you tell us approximately when and for how long you were at that, detained there at Krang Che?
It's not Krang Che, but Krang Che. I was detained at Krang Che. It was a reflection center of the commune, and I cannot recall the date of the detention. I was detained there for quite a long time.
Do you recall what you saw when you walked in? In one of your statements, you talked about that. Do you recall anything on the wall?
On the first day that we arrived, we knew that we would be sent to the interrogation place. And there they hanged hammers, ribs, tools to remove nails. And if we were asked about letter A, we had to respond about letter A. And if they asked about B, we had to respond about B.
Did you ever hear other people being interrogated? And, well, first let me ask you that. Were you aware of others being detained, being interrogated?
I didn't witness the torture myself. There was a torture place. However, at midnight I could hear the screaming. So this means that the interrogation did not take place during the daytime or in late evening, and it was conducted at midnight.
What kind of people were detained? Do you know why the prisoners were detained at that facility?
In fact, I did not know the kinds of people who were detained there. There were all kinds of people, men, women, transgenders. However, we were placed in different detention pits. I could only speak about those who were detained in the same pit. And the area was pretty big.
When you say a pit, can you briefly describe what you mean?
That repression center or prison was not held at a pagoda or at a temple. In fact, they dug a pit about 5 meters deep. Then they laid some bamboo trunks in there and some leaves, and people were placed in there.
Where was this located, Krang Che? Can you tell us what province it was in, or district?
Krang Che was located in Ong Knol commune during the Pol Pot regime, and now it is in Borai Chulasa district. Previously it was in Trang or Kohandat of Takai province.
So it was in Takao province, if I understand correctly. Now, did you subsequently get sent to, excuse me, one question about that. Let me move on, sorry. Did you subsequently get sent to another prison at Phnom San Lung?
Councillor for Kieu Sampon, you had the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm listening carefully to the questions put by the co-prosecutors since the start of this hearing, and I note that the detention centers that he's bringing up do not fall within the scope of the trial. It's true that in the context of his statement of suffering, the civil party can speak about the totality of the facts, but here I'm objecting to what the prosecutor is putting questions regarding facts that do not fall within the severance order in any case.
Your Honors, it's the prosecution position and key to our case that the torture of individuals, the detention of innocent people, classification as enemies, and executions was part of a national policy. And that's why these national leaders, Q Sampan and Nunchea, are responsible for these crimes. Now, if the defense is willing to stipulate that this was a national policy, I don't need to go into it. But if they are, as sometimes claimed, at least by Nunchea, that these were local decisions, then I think it's important that we at least briefly describe what happened around the country. And I do promise to be very brief. I only have a few minutes left.
Well, let me answer very briefly. The question is not what the co-prosecutor wishes to deal with, but why the chamber is linked to what it's seized of. So if the chamber is not seized of these facts, we should not talk about them. It's very clear which security centers fall within the scope of the trial. So if we're going to follow the co-prosecutor's logic, we can speak about everything. In that point, in that case, there's no point having a severance order or a closing order.
I think we can shorten the debate. We have had a practice so far that as long as it is brief and doesn't go into details, we allow those questions against the background of the national policy issue. So we hope the prosecutor sticks to his promise to remain brief.
Sir, were you detained at Phnom San Long, and where was that located?
I cannot recall the date because I remained detained in a prison and I could not see the daylight much. And we were allowed outside for a very limited period of time. I was transferred from Krang Chek to Phnom San Long prison, and it was still located in Takeo province.
At that prison, can you briefly describe the conditions that you saw?
During the Pol Pot regime, while I was detained at the Phnom San Long prison, there was a cave, and I believe the cave has been dismantled or damaged. Because later on I went there, the cave was no longer there. At the time while I was detained, I was ordered to break rock for 1 cubic meter per day, and I did not know where the broken rocks were sent to. And if we could not achieve the work quota, we would be deprived of food for that day.
People sleep on beds at night, or how were your accommodations at the nighttime?
There was no single bed for each of us. They let bamboo on the ground and we slept on it, and then our ankles will be shackled underneath. We slept in a row on this bamboo.
Do you know why people were detained at that prison? Did you ever learn what the allegations against them were?
We did not know about the offenses because by that time we stuck to the principle of being silent. and we kept focusing on breaking the rock in order to achieve 1 cubic meter per hectare so that we could eat. And we did not dare ask one another what mistake that person committed. We were afraid of being killed.
Did anyone disappear when you were there from that prison?
Councillor Fakir Sampon, you had the floor.
Mr. President, I object again for the same reasons as I presented earlier. We are speaking about detailed conditions in a security center that does not fall within the scope of the trial, so I object.
How many more questions to the security center?
A couple, one or two, I believe. But, Your Honors, this is tied in. There's a previous statements from witnesses about this being part of a purge. And I'd also point out that all of this occurred, all of these witnesses' experience in what Michael Vickery, an expert often cited by the defense, called the Pol Pot zone par excellence, the Southwest. So it's all very relevant to the national policies. So, sir, if I could just ask you, tell us, did people disappear, and how do you know?
The issue of disappearance happened. Sometimes people disappear every 2 or 3 days, and maybe we presume that the person got sick, and we didn't dare to ask about the disappearance. And of course we knew that when a person disappeared, it meant the person was sent for study session, and that the term to go for a study session had a different connotation from the current definition of that phrase.
Did you ever go outside and see or smell anything?
At the mountain where we were detained, we did not witness anything strange because the execution site was different. That was held on a hill to the west of the mountain. I knew that the hill was the execution site later on. So when people went there to conduct a ritual or a ceremony, people disappeared during my detention, and I did not know whether they were sent to be killed at that hill or they were sent for study session elsewhere. And when we heard that people were sent for study sessions, it means that they disappeared.
Okay, I'm finished asking you in particular about the security centers. I want to ask you about all of your experiences during the DK period in that southwest zone area, Takao or Kandal. Can you tell us, did you encounter ethnic Vietnamese people, and do you know what happened to them during the regime?
In Takao province, I lived in the cooperative for a short period of time only, as I spent a lot of time in a mobile unit. And then I was detained in the prisons, and I did not know about the advancement of the attack by the Vietnamese troops. After I was released from San Long prison, I was sent to live in Con Dao province, and I did not observe any Vietnamese people living there. Maybe they had been executed earlier, But after the middle part of the regime, when I was in Kandahar province, I did not witness or see any Vietnamese people. However, I saw Cham people.
Okay, thank you. Sir, what about former Lon Nol soldiers? Did you see how the regime, when you were there between 75 and 79, treated former Lon Nol soldiers, or even the families of people who had family members who had been Lon Nol soldiers?
I did not know much about the family situation of other people. I only knew about my own family members, and I suffered from the losses of my family members. My father was also a former Lon Nol soldier, and my family members had all been killed, including my distant cousins and distant relatives. When you are members of the families who had members who were former soldiers, they had been killed. 16 of my family members and relatives were killed. My father was a former soldier. I myself was also a soldier before 1975, and some of my family members and relatives were also soldiers. And they were all killed because they were accused of being soldiers or connected to family members who were soldiers.
How did the Khmer Rouge learn whether people had family members who had been Lon Nol soldiers?
There was no need for anyone to report to the authority, because my father's relatives were officers for forestry, and later on they became soldiers. Some of them were officers, military officers. Some members were also intellectuals, and that's why they knew about that. And that was the reason leading to that death. They conducted their search, and they knew that the members of my family were soldiers and were former teachers, and they were the target of being killed.
Did you ever witness whether Madam, did you ever witness whether the Khmer Rouge kept lists or collected biographies of ordinary people? Such as your family members?
Not only for the ordinary people, some best people also had to make their biography. My family members, including my mother and father, were honest because they hoped that he would be returned to his military function and that he could assist Cambodians. They were honest. And as for some of my siblings, when the regime fell, we went to various parts of Cambodia and none survived.
One other question, sir. When you were in San Lung prison, did you ever hear about Krang Tachan prison in Tram Kak district?
I briefly knew about Krang Tachan prison in Tram Kak, after I was transferred from Sanlong prison in order to go to Bandar province, I was sent overnight to stay at Kantachan prison because at that time the Vietnamese troops almost advanced to the area. I was detained there for one night only, but I was not allowed to stay inside the prison there.
So you were actually kept outside of the prison, but near it. Is that, do I understand correctly? Inside the gates, perhaps, but outside the buildings, or could you explain?
Yes, that is correct. I was sent there as a depositee for overnight, and I heard security people said that there were no detainees there. But I knew that it was a prison because I had been detained in other places. So they sent me to stay with the security people there. However, I was not handcuffed, as people from Sanlong prison told the security force there that I committed only minor offense, and by the next morning I left the area.
Okay, thank you. So if you don't know the answer to this question, please tell us. But do you know whether people disappeared or how they were treated at Krang Tachan prison?
I did not ask how they were treated. As I said, I was there overnight only. Then, by the time I arrived there from Sanlong prison, it was nightfall, and I did not know much because by next morning, security force took me to Kandahar province. I asked people there, and they said that there were no prisons being detained there. And only later on, when I visited Krang Tachan, I found out that some of my family members and relatives were killed there at Krang Tachan.
Thank you, Madam Witness. Thank you, Your Honors. I have no further questions, and I don't believe my colleague does either.
I'd like to hand the floor now to the defense team for Nuon Chea. Council, thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Madam Civil Party. My name is Liu Sawana. I'm the National Counsel for Nuon Chea's defense, and I have some questions to put to you. I'd like to ask some questions in relation to your background. Yesterday, you stated that prior to 1975, you were a singer in a bar. However, just then, you just stated that you were a former Colonial soldier. Did you perform any other tasks, or did you have any other jobs besides these two? For example, a movie actor? Answer: no, I was not a movie actor due to my appearance, but I was a singer, as I could sing and I could also perform in a traditional theater. I did not involve in filming. I was a soldier, and that happened prior to 1970. I was a soldier during 1968 or 69. I was a medic in the army. Of course, it was a lengthy background, and in short, I could say that the entire members of my family were either soldiers or teachers. And I was a bit different from the rest of my family members, as my education was rather limited. I finished my education in 1960, and then I engaged in my study in the School of Arts. Question, thank you. I move on to other areas that is in relation to the period prior to your marriage. You said that in February 1977 there was a policy that people were required to get married, and you stated that you were forced to get married. Can you describe to the Chamber about the marriage policy or the regulations on marriage? Answer. I made mention of the marriage regulation yesterday, that it started from February 1977. And I also stated yesterday that I only heard about the arrangement for people to get married by that month, that youths were required to get married. And only later on I knew that the policy actually existed when I was forced to cut my hair. And finally it happened. A few months after, I was forced to get married, and whether I consented to the marriage. And I told the court about that my mother was very old, and if I got married, who's going to look after my mother? And I was told that uncle would look after my mother, and that uncle required me to get married. And I kept asking for a delay, and that happened during the initial period. And finally I got married by force in August 1977, and between February to August I had been threatened on several occasions. I was threatened that I would be killed or I would be sent for study sessions, but I cannot recall all the details.
Counsel, please avoid repetitive questions. We have heard all of that. I don't want to get into the same thing we had yesterday. Please, no questions that have already been answered.
Lawyer, yesterday I heard you stated that you were forced. So who forced you?
Sorry, we have counsel. If you have specific questions that go beyond what we have heard yesterday, ask them. But we are not here to hear the same story again and again.
Good morning, Mr. President. Is it working? Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, judges. It's our understanding that it's Nuon Chia's fundamental right to test the evidence against him. And sometimes the way to do that is eliciting questions which may sound repetitive in nature, but sometimes we have different answers. We heard that earlier this week. I think on occasion I asked the exact same questions as the international co-prosecutor and got different answers. We think that this is our fundamental right. And in any case, my understanding is my colleagues' questions are, with some nuances, different to the questions that have already been asked and are intended to test the evidence. We think this is perfectly within Mr. Nuon Chia's fundamental human rights.
As I've mentioned yesterday, obviously there is a right of the defense to test the evidence. On the other hand, repetitive questions are forbidden under the law. And I didn't see any nuance. I heard the same question I heard yesterday. So convince me that there are nuances. I don't go with what you said. It must be allowed to ask the same question again and again until we get different answers. Otherwise, the prohibition against repetitive questions wouldn't make sense. So to clarify that, repetitive questions are forbidden. 87.3, that's the law. If there are nuances, by all means. I didn't hear any nuances so far.
Lawyer. Thank you, Madam Judge. Perhaps I did not get the answers yesterday. Yesterday, I did not hear the name of the unit chief who says that was the person who forced the civil party. So I'm here to elicit evidence so that the chamber has full information. And I will move forward if you are prohibiting me from asking such a question. Mr. Civil Party, concerning the policies about the marriage, where and when did you hear such policies? Answer. I told you yesterday already, 17 April, people were not regularly invited to a meeting. When they were called to a meeting, that means they were to be killed or they would be used. So the meeting that we were invited to was the day that we had to get married. Although the chamber prohibited me from telling the name, I would tell you now. I did not know the name or names of the one or ones who forced me. And concerning Tamok, the leader of the country was used a different name, and Pol Pot had an official name that is Salot Saw. So I could not tell you the exact names. Some of those people were referred to by Ankol and or Cadre. What I am answering here, I am courageous to responsible for what I said. I only tell the truth. Lawyer, thank you. Yesterday, you made mention that you and your wife had a prior discussion before the marriage. You told her, and she told you to have the scarves on each other's head. So what did your wife respond to you when you told her about using scarf? Answer. It is difficult for me to inform and tell you, Mr. Lawyer. I told you already that my wife and I were living in the same village and in the same unit. We were orphans. We had pity on one another. So I took chance to have a prior discussion, and if it was found out, we would have been killed. I told my wife to wear the scarf on her head, and I would wrap the scarf around my neck. I told you and the chamber already yesterday, and if you still did not get the answer, I do not know how to help you. Lawyer, my apology, Mr. Civil Party. I want to know about the response from your wife. So what was her response when you made such a request to her to wear the scarf on her head? Answer. I told her about that, but at the time she kept silent because she was a shy woman. I told her that we were orphans. We had no parents, so we should do like what we discussed. I did not have chance to chit-chat with her like the present situation when we go and discuss and chit-chat at cockpit or riverside. As I said, I told my would-be wife to wear the scarf on her head, and I would wrap the scarf around my neck. And I did not have chance to have a casual conversation or chit-chat with her. I was so painful at the time. Lawyer, thank you. Yesterday you stated that the marriage was arranged for you, for both the new and older people. You stated that your unit chief was in charge of the 17th April. So what was his or her origin? Or was he or she from 17th April people group? Answer. You repeated your question, Mr. Lawyer. And for me, during the marriage, I was much with the 17th April female. So you asked me the same question. You asked about the would-be wife that I had to marry. In fact, we could only marry a man or woman from the same group, that is 17 April or 18 April people, respectively. It is a repetitive question. However, I am happy to answer any kind of repetitive questions. Lawyer. And my next question, how many people were under the charge of the unit chief? Answer. I do not know, Mr. Lawyer. I do not know how many people under the responsibility of a male or female unit chief. I do not know how many groups were divided into. At the time, I did not have a right to stand and have a casual conversation, and the same applies to the unit chief. I did not have time or have right to discuss with my mother. I do not know, Mr. Lawyer, how many people were under the responsibility of the female unit chief or male unit chief. They had a respective number of people to be control of. And even the unit chief themselves did not dare to poke into one another's business. They had different tasks to perform. Men and women did not dare to discuss with one another, even in the same unit. If we were found to have a discussion with one another, we would be considered having committing moral offenses. President, Mr. Civil Party, you may only respond to the limit of the question. The answer saying no or yes is considered your answer already. You may now proceed, Lawyer Liu Savanna. I would like to resume my questioning, Mr. President. Yesterday you stated that during the ceremony, the wedding ceremony, there was lamp post or lighting on the small hill. Was that lighting turned on regularly? I did not know whether the electricity or lighting was used on a daily basis, but on that day there was electricity or lighting in the ceremony? Question. Yesterday, you stated that you were required to stand in 2 rows, and you were in the 7th row. The first and second row were based on old people. So during the time, were people required to stand in rows mixing with one another? So how was the division of groups? Answer. New people were to get married with new people, and the old was to marry the old people. And I was already considered or assigned to marry which woman lawyer. At the time, you stated that there were 107 couples, and 80 of which were new people. So I would like to ask you, how many rows were there at the time? Were there only 2 rows, or how many rows? The old people were told to stand in their own rows, and we were required to stand in our own rows. Question. In the ceremony, the wedding ceremony, you yesterday told that commune chief, corporate chiefs, and village chiefs were attending the ceremony. Did some of those people address the crowd? I told you already, speeches were made. They said Angka was happy to marry a wife or a woman to you, and in order to return the gratitude as children, you had to get married. And we were required to produce children. Question. Did one person address the crowd, or were there many attendees or people addressing the crowd? And did you recall the names? Answer. I cannot recall their names. I said already I do not recall the names of any chiefs. If I see them, I would recognize. However, at the time, I was not told of their names. Question. So how many people, again, addressed the crowd? 1, 2, or 3? Answer. To my best knowledge, there was only one person addressing the crowd. That person was referred to as Ta, and he grabbed the microphone and spoke at the time. I would like to know, through your observation, were the people who were to get married use scarves as well? You are talking about the children or scarves? Lawyer, you stated that you had a scarf wrapping around your neck and your wife wearing the kurama on her head. I would like to know whether other people use scarves as well at the time. Answer. Regarding kurama or scarves, children had kuramas as well, so everyone had them. Question. On the wedding day, where did those couples place their kuramas? Could you elaborate about that? I find it difficult to explain you, Mr. Lawyer. They wrapped kuramas around their necks. What about the women? Did they also wrap a kurama or scarves around their necks as well? I told the chamber already that all of us wrapped kurama or scarves around their necks. However, we used a different technique, different way to wear kurama around our neck and head. Question. When you were required to queue, did you at the time look for your wife? Answer. If I was not looking for her, how could I find where she was? So I was looking at her at the time. Because there were 80 couples standing in lines. I would like to know the position of her standing. Did she stand in front of the rows or lines, in the middle or at the back? Answer. Not 80 couples, Mr. Lawyer. Please state it correctly. There were 107 couples, 80 of which were the 17 April people. Not 80 couples were to get married. So it is difficult for me to answer your question. If you are asking about 80 couples, I will now answer the question accordingly. I, at the time, was looking at her to see where she was standing. Lawyer, let me clarify that point. I used the term 80 couples because you stated that the couples were put in two groups. One was the 17 April group, and the other one was the older people group. So could you clarify that for the chamber? How many groups were required to queue at the time? I informed the chamber already. 80 couples were standing close to each other, and we were required to have two lines. Lawyer, I am certain now, so my question is, about your position of your wife at the time. Where was she standing? Did she stand in front of the line, in front of other, in the middle, or at the back? Answer: we were standing close to one another. Question: concerning the lines, were the lines close to one another? And could you clarify that for me when you stated that you two were standing close to one another? I do not know how to explain that to you. I told you already that there were two lines, and I and my wife were standing close to one another. So what else can I tell you? Question: for example, you stated that you were in the 7th row. So counting from the front, you were in the 7th. So can you tell the chamber about your wife's position at the time? Where was she? Answer: I told the court already yesterday that I was standing in number 7. After our names were called, I and my wife were going to number 7, and before the time we were stand in different lines. So I was the 7th couple who were called by Anka to make a resolution at the time. Lawyer: thank you very much. I understand it now. So can you tell the chamber about the distance between you and your wife at the time? So how far were you standing from one another? Answer: we were 1 or 2 meters apart. Question: I am now asking you about the time after your marriage. Yesterday you told the chamber already. However, I would like you to tell the exact time period. How long after your marriage did you consummate your marriage, to your recollection? Answer: I do not recall the exact date. It was long after the marriage that I consummated my marriage. Question: if you compare it to the month, so do you recall how many months after the marriage? President, Mr. Civil Party, please wait for the microphone to turn on before you answer. Answer: I do not recall when I consummated the marriage. I did not have time to even count the days or time. I was at the time waiting for the day to come. Question: yesterday you stated that you were called to be questioned from time to time because you did not agree to consummate the marriage or sleep with your wife. Do you recall how many times were you called to be questioned before you decided to consummate your marriage? I was repeatedly by the group chief to study sessions from time to time, and that happened to my wife as well. I cannot recall how many times I was called. Question. Besides that, were there any action taken against you? I do not know what kind of actions to be taken against me. Lastly, I and my wife were given alcohol to drink during the Khmer Rouge time. I did not have any watch or clock to time.
Question. Yesterday you testified that after you were given wine to drink, you and your wife got drunk, and as a result you consummated the marriage. Can you tell the chamber whether the consummation that night was voluntary and based on both the feeling, your feeling and your wife's feeling? Answer. I cannot tell you the intimate moment of the consummation. Question. I'd like to ask about your feeling before you consummated the marriage, whether the consummation was voluntary. What led you to have or to consummate the marriage with your wife on that particular occasion? Answer. I testified yesterday on this point, and as I testified yesterday, I did not have any feeling for any woman. And if you listen to me carefully, you understand about the nature of a transgender person like myself, and what I did was out of fear of being killed. Question. So you consummated the marriage because you were afraid of being killed? And why did you think that if you failed to consummate the marriage, you would be killed? What were the reasons behind your thinking? Answer. Please repeat your question. Question. You just mentioned that you consummated the marriage because you fear that you will be killed. And my question to you is, what were the reasons that led you to consummate the marriage? And if you failed to do so, what were the reasons that would lead you to have such fear of being killed? Answer. It is difficult for me to respond to your question. I testified earlier that we were called for re-education, and of course they had measures for us if we failed to do so. Question. You said you will call for meetings for re-educations on a number of occasions. And what I asked was about the measure, and you said the last resort for them was to provide you with wine so that you could drink it with your wife. What about other measures